Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to the Foreign Office as we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the treaty signing from which these great rooms derive their name. Je suis désolé que, contrairement à mon prédécesseur Austin Chamberlain, I am unable to preside over today's events in fluent French. But thank you, Dominique, for that introduction, and also to the Swiss mission in London for co-hosting today's events. And let me also welcome the Mayor of Locarno here today to represent the City of Peace, where the treaties were negotiated 100 years ago. And I'm pleased to also say we're joined by representatives of the countries that signed the treaties in this room in 1925. As well as our friends from other nations who share a common interest in the search for peace on our continent and a resolution to conflicts across the globe today. So this afternoon I want to commemorate the signing of the Locarno Treaties and to reflect on what the spirit of Locarno can teach us about responding to the rapidly changing security challenges facing our world today. Looking back at the coverage of the treaty signing from 1925, I was struck by how modern some of the discussion felt. There was even what we would nowadays call a spin row. It seems that exclusive filming rights for the ceremony were sold to the Gaumont Company, and the British media were furious. And even worse, in an attempt to protect that exclusive deal, overzealous Foreign Office officials called for the police to remove press photographers from the courtyard below us. And the result was that in the 3 weeks after the ceremony, there were 4 separate debates in Parliament about the filming row and just 1 about the military consequences of the Locarno Pact. But beyond all the noise, it's clear from every contemporary account of the treaty ceremony that the unmistakable sense there was among all of those present about the weight and importance of what they were trying to achieve and the duty that they owed to the peoples of Europe to succeed. Because every delegate spoke about the cause of international unity. It was just 7 years on from the end of the Great War, and the memory of millions lost and the debt of peace owed to them weighed very heavily on everyone. Millions of people like Lieutenant Eric Henn, who in the summer of 1914 had come second in the entrance exams for a place here at the Foreign Office. But instead of starting his new job in this building, he volunteered to join the army. And he shipped out to France in 1915 and was killed just a month later. So all that potential stolen too soon. And for his mother and father, their only child lost. And in 1925, millions of parents were still mourning their lost sons and daughters, which explained why men and women standing in this great room 100 years ago openly wept when the French Foreign Minister Briand quoted a letter that he had received because of the Locarno Conference. He said, "Allow the mother of a family to congratulate you. At last I shall be able to look at my children without apprehension and love them with security." And King George V, wrote in his diary that night, "I pray this may mean many years of peace. Why not forever?" Of course, forever was not to be. And we could spend hours debating how far flaws in the treaties led to their demise, the weakness of the guarantees of Polish and Czech sovereignty, the limited institutional underpinnings, or a lack of resilience within the signatory nations. But as contested as the letter of the Locarno Treaties still is, we shouldn't forget that it was the spirit of common endeavour that in 1925 was so striking, and the spirit that matters still, because it was still seen as brave and radical at that time. As the award speech at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony stated the following year, and I quote, "If we are to appreciate fully what these statesmen accomplished, we must not overlook the violent nationalistic opposition in their own countries, which several of them had to overcome to push through the peace programme." A group of political leaders choosing to pursue peace and unity and recognizing that partnerships with nations abroad made them stronger and more secure at home. And that's the spirit that matters just as much today, at a time of huge global instability in a world where we face ever more complex hybrid security threats. And the most acute of which, for us, right now, lies in Russia's war against Ukraine. It has been nearly 4 years since Vladimir Putin led his illegal invasion into Ukraine. Unprovoked, unjustifiable, and unforgivable. And in the period since, Ukraine has been subjected to drone and missile strikes day in, day out, targeting civilians, while Russia has embarked on an appalling campaign to abduct Ukrainian children and to re-educate them, to adopt pro-Russian views. But each time, the Russians have underestimated Ukraine and underestimated their friends. No one wants this war and the suffering and destruction it has wrought to continue, least of all Ukraine. And that is why the attempts by the US and President Trump to broker a ceasefire and pursue a sustainable end to this war are so important. It's why just over the road in 10 Downing Street yesterday, the Prime Minister hosted President Zelensky alongside E3 counterparts to talk about the prospects for peace. And yesterday, I met Secretary Rubio and others in Washington, D.C. to discuss the negotiations and the path towards an agreement. An agreement which must be just and it must be lasting. It must deter Russia, not give them simply a platform to come again, and it must be acceptable to Ukraine. But while we have 2 presidents pursuing peace, the Russian president has continued to escalate the war with drones and bombs. And Russia's aggression and security threats go far beyond Ukraine. We've seen sabotage in European cities, reckless breaches of NATO airspace, relentless cyber attacks, a full spectrum campaign to test us, to provoke us, and to destabilize us. And that is why the UK has so consistently supported Ukraine in its efforts to resist Russian aggression, because this is the right thing to do, morally and strategically, but also because it is our security that is at stake too. But while those ceasefire discussions for Ukraine continue, I want to just take a step back and reflect on how the current security challenges we and partner nations face relate back to the principles established through the Locarno Treaty 100 years ago. And I want to offer 2 reflections. Firstly, on the transformed nature of the security threats compared to a century ago and how that means we need to respond. But secondly, on the changing partnerships and the renewed multilateralism we need if we're to confront the full range of shared threats that we face. So first on the threats. Armed conflict is, of course, the threat uppermost in our minds as we think of Ukraine. Other traditional security threats have not gone away, from border disputes through to terrorism and nuclear proliferation. But novel and hybrid threats to our collective security have emerged which would have been inconceivable a century ago. From tampering with underseas communication cables to using biotechnology and AI as new kinds of weapons of war, those threats can come in many different forms and from many different quarters. Some of these threats are flagrantly visible, the spy ships in our waters or the acts of violence, terror or sabotage in our cities. Some have not always been recognised for the threats and risks that they pose, in particular on issues of economic security. For example, the over-reliance of European nations on imports of energy from Russia, or also on China for critical minerals that we need. And across Europe, we are witnessing an escalation in hybrid threats, from physical through to cyber, designed to weaken our critical national infrastructure, undermine our interests, or destabilise our democracies, all for the advantage of malign foreign states. Some of these threats have echoes 100 years ago. So 2 years before Locarno in 1923, the Soviet Union coined the expression desinformatia and set up their first office to deploy disinformation. But the term disinformation doesn't really begin to capture the industrial scale approach from some malign actors today. 100 years ago, state-sponsored disruptors may have relied on expertly forged documents or carefully planted stories to manipulate public opinion. Today's technology gives them the ability to do that on steroids. And in 2024, evidence suggests that automated online traffic surpassed human activity for the first time, with some evidence that malicious bots accounting for more than a third of all messages. In the Moldovan elections 2 months ago, we saw fake websites designed to be the spitting image of legitimate outlets fabricating policies for politicians they sought to discredit. Across Africa, we've seen videos laundered through apparent news portals with false claims about the Ukrainian president and his wife seeking to undermine support for Ukraine. And across Europe, Russian agencies responsible for vast malign online networks like Doppelganger that seek to flood social media with counterfeit documents and deepfake material in English, German and French to advance Russia's strategic aims. This isn't about legitimate debate on contentious issues. We have wide-ranging debates with strong views on all sides on many things. But this is about state-backed organisations who seek to do us harm, pursuing malign aims. So we should call out this for what it is, Russian information warfare, and we are defending ourselves. So it's why we have built world-class cybersecurity, expert law enforcement and intelligence capabilities. Why, since October of last year, this government has sanctioned 31 different organisations and individuals responsible for delivering Russia's information warfare. And why today I've gone further in exposing and sanctioning the Russian media outlet Rybar, whose Telegram channel and network of affiliates in 28 languages reaches millions worldwide using classic Kremlin manipulation tactics, including fake investigations and AI-driven content, to shape narratives about global events in the Kremlin's favour. Masquerading as an independent body, Rybar is in fact partially coordinated by the presidential administration and receiving funding from the Russian state corporation Rostec and working with members of the Russian intelligence services. We've also sanctioned Pravfond, attributed by Estonia as a front for the GRU, where leaked reports suggest that Pravfond finances pushing Kremlin narratives to Western audiences, as well as bankrolling legal defences for convicted Russian assassins and arms traffickers. And our new measures will also hit the Moscow-based so-called think tank, the Centre for Geopolitical Expertise, and its founder, Alexander Dugin, whose work closely informs Putin's calculations, and an organisation whose senior leaders are involved in Storm 1516, a malign influence network, which produces content designed to create support for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. But it isn't just Russia, and it isn't just about information. Other countries are also enabling or ignoring different kinds of undeclared action or cyber threats. And that is why today, with support from our international partners, we are also sanctioning 2 of the most egregious China-based companies, iSoon and Integrity Technology Group, for their vast and indiscriminate cyber activities against the UK and its allies. Attacks like this impact our collective security and our public services, yet those responsible operate often with little regard for who and what they target. And so we are ensuring this should not go unchecked, and our message to those who would seek to harm us is clear. We see you in the shadows, we know what you are doing, and we will defend ourselves and the international partnerships on which we depend. And it's partnerships with our allies across the world that have enabled these steps that we have taken today. The growing cooperation between our teams in the UK, in France, Germany, Poland, Brussels and other countries that has led to these sanctions, pooling expertise, understanding and evidence. And that's what takes me to my second reflection about the collective Locarno spirit and why multilateral action matters more than ever, but why it needs to modernise and adapt. Because faced with growing global instability, there can be a tendency now to talk about 2 clashing perspectives. One, that the era of traditional multilateral partnerships or collective commitments is over, that as we move into the second quarter of the 21st century, only great power politics matters. Or alternatively, that at a time of global turmoil, we need to revert solely to the multilateral architecture built up since the Second World War as the only safe refuge, and we dare not risk stepping outside it or asking it to change. Neither are true as an account of the world or as an account of UK foreign policy and our national interests today. The first ignores the lessons of history, that we are stronger if we tackle shared threats together. But the second ignores today's reality, where long-standing institutions, as important as they may be, can still be too constrained or too slow to respond. So what we need instead in today's world is to approach every challenge, tackle every threat by finding the most effective means of cooperation to get each job done. Creative diplomacy, diplomatic entrepreneurialism, a new and reinvigorated and more agile form of multilateralism adapting to the demands of the task. So drawing on our long-standing relationships and institutions, but also adapting, reforming and building new partnerships too. That's the approach that the UK is taking, but it also reflects what we see around us. So if we look at the new and old groupings, the range of groupings that helped create the conditions for peace in the Middle East, for the ceasefire in Gaza, in the last few months, we've seen the world come together to support the US-led peace process, a 20-point plan drawn up by President Trump, but working with mediators from Qatar, Turkey and Egypt, and following the commitments made by the whole of the Arab League to isolate Hamas, and the recognition of Palestine by the UK and dozens more nations at the UN, and a declaration then endorsed by 142 countries, and a ceasefire agreement supported by over 25 nations at Sharm el-Sheikh, followed weeks later by a UN Security Council resolution to support implementation on the ground and provide the mandate to move forward. So that was leadership by the US, but with new and agile partnerships for peace coming together from across the globe, but underpinned by multilateral institutional agreement. It's not multilateralism as we've always known it, but it is essential in today's world and must be matched by further work to reform and adapt. But look at other examples, the E3 cooperating on the nuclear threat from Iran, the vital work underway now that we in the UK are supporting in the Quad and at the UN to seek to secure a badly needed humanitarian ceasefire in Sudan. And the new deals that Britain has agreed with France on migration returns and with Germany on tackling smuggler gangs as pilots for broader cooperation in future. In each case, we see new partnerships of like-minded countries with the agency and will to secure rapid breakthroughs supported by later broader agreements, rather than having to wait for them. And nowhere does that matter more than on our collective response to that most immediate national security challenge that we face, that I talked about, on Russia and Ukraine. And so there too, we have worked to strengthen and reinvigorate NATO as the cornerstone of European security, but we've also worked flexibly and creatively to bring like-minded European countries together and beyond, working with the US on the peace process, but also the leadership the Prime Minister has shown, working with France to establish the coalition of the willing. More than 30 countries signing up, including all the original Locarno signatories, not just in Europe, but beyond, because we recognise the threat Russia poses. For too long, Europe has relied too heavily on US support to protect ourselves from the threats to Euro-Atlantic security, and we can do so no more. Europe must step up because it is fundamentally in our own interests, and because our continent is first and foremost our responsibility, and because the transatlantic partnership will be stronger and more durable if that burden is properly shared. And so earlier this year, the Prime Minister took the decision to boost defence spending up to 5% of GDP by 2035, making difficult trade-offs in the meantime. But it's also why we're deepening cooperations and partnership on security across the world, including, for example, our carrier strike group, conducting operations with partners well beyond NATO across the Indo-Pacific, but then placed directly under the command of NATO on its return leg, reflecting still that centrality of NATO in all that we do. So that is how the UK will operate, agile and pragmatic partnerships for the sake of our national security, our shared interests, and the principles that we champion across the world. So yes, that's why I believe the centenary we mark today is so important. A vital reminder that when we discuss the modern threats we face, whether it be from information warfare to the shared risks to our economic security, to cyber security, border security, and beyond, that Locarno spirit is not a quaint relic of times long gone, but an essential lesson from history. A reminder that for us in the UK, the partnerships we build abroad make us stronger and more secure here at home. And to reinforce that, let me quote the words of the German Foreign Minister Gustav Stresemann, spoken in this great room 100 years ago after he added his name to the treaties. And he said, "One fact has emerged, namely that we are bound to another by a single and common fate. If we go down together. If we are to reach the heights, we do so not by conflict, but by common effort." And Dr. Stresemann's words are as vital and powerful now as they were 100 years ago. He reminds us of the duty that we all have, every person, every leader, and every nation, to work together in the pursuit of peace, security, and democracy, and to stand together against anyone who threatens that goal. That is our task today, as surely as it was 100 years ago. And that is the Locarno spirit, which we must now keep alive. Thank you very much.